Loved ones, I'd like to continue the conversation that we began last Sunday morning. And I'd really encourage you to make it a conversation. I'm game to give a kind of introduction to the subject, but I really do ask you to ask questions, and questions that are really on your minds. And not because I think I can answer them all, or not because I think that my opinion is so important, but because we have so rarely discussed Christian marriage and God's idea of sex and love, that really we've been deluged for years by society's opinions. And I think it's vitally important that a group of us, such as we are this morning, discuss freely and openly what God believes marriage and love and sex should be. And that's why I think we need to discuss it. Because I think if we've had any kind of teaching on the subject, it's been one-way stuff. Some Moses-like creature telling us what we should do. And many of us have had questions in our hearts that we've really wanted desperately to ask. Or at least we've wanted to have some kind of feedback, or at least just put up our hand and say, I disagree. And so I'd really plead with you to be real this morning, and don't clam up on me after I give my introduction, because it's your questions that really make the thing real. Now, loved ones, you wouldn't believe it, but really we're only about halfway through, but I think I should stop for a moment. And we'll continue next Sunday on the other reasons for marriage, but would you like to question at this point? And maybe not, and that's all right. Brother?
Pastor, I'd like you to go a little deeper in you said people that say we're married a few years back.
Okay.
How about people that were divorced a few years
Good.
back?
Brother says, what about loved ones who were divorced a few years back? It seems to me, brother, the same verse applies. If you're married, do not seek to be unmarried. If you're divorced, do not seek to be undivorced, unless you can reconcile. We'll deal with divorce. I'm afraid it'll be 2 Sundays on now. But the Bible clearly encourages you to be reconciled to the one from whom you were divorced. So undoubtedly one should do that. But I was taking it that you were saying, what about a loved one who divorced years ago and the partner has married again, or they have married again? Then you cannot go back and create all the chaos and unhappiness that would come from breaking up marriages and remarrying. But where it was possible to be reconciled, either because you yourself had not married again or because the other person had not married again, then God says we should be. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Jeff brings up the awkward one that I know it gave me trouble with my wife when I said in a radio program that one should be able to love everyone as much as your own wife. And even though my wife is somewhere here, I still say it, yeah. That the heart of married love, loved ones, is not that it contains more love. How you would measure love anyway is difficult, Jeff. But the heart of married love is not that you love your wife more than you love everybody else in the world, but that you express that love in a way that is appropriate to your wife or to your husband. And that the precious thing about being someone's wife or being someone's husband is not that he loves me more than everybody else in the world, or that she loves me more than everybody else in the world, because there's something wrong if that's the case, but that the mighty God of the whole universe, when he was establishing Mount Everest and when he was establishing the bounds of the Mediterranean Ocean, decided that I should be the wife, I should be the husband of this dear person. And that is a steadiness and stability that is just beyond anything that the mere love of a human being could bring to you. And so it is important, loved ones, to hold to that, because I think very often we'll be talking about celibacy maybe 3 Sundays from now, but the heart of celibacy and the beauty of celibacy is made possible because husbands and wives are not little closed enclaves that make everybody else feel the third man out or the third woman out. But in fact, they are dear partners who make everybody else know that they love them as much as they love each other.
Does God ever will a Christian to marry a non-Christian?
Yes, it says, does God ever will a Christian to marry a non-Christian? And all I could quote you is that verse, be ye not unequally yoked. And testify, loved ones, that there are many of us here in this group this morning who would say, for goodness sake and for God's sake, do not be dumb enough to think that you can be happy in an intimate relationship with another person who differs from you on such a basic subject as what your attitude to God should be. And loved ones, all of us who are married would testify to the truth of that verse, be ye not unequally yoked. We would say, listen, many of us have found enough trouble just because we come from different backgrounds. Many of us have found enough trouble just because we have different interests. But if we differed on such an intimate, basic topic as what our relationship to the Creator of the universe should be, there would be no peace between us at all. Yeah.
Pastor, I was wondering if you could speak a little more about what it means to be married or yoked to your own worst weaknesses.
Oh, brother says what it means to be married to your own worst weaknesses. Well, all of us who are married get rather embarrassed when we think of this. But it is interesting, brother, that after 3 or 4 years, you begin to talk like your partner. It's terrible. And you begin to have the same gestures as your partner. And then it's not long before you either begin to see your own weaknesses mirrored in them, or you begin to see that deep, deep down, without really knowing it, you married something of yourself in them. Some of it was your own strength, but some of it was your own weakness. It's interesting that God almost seems to use that you have in common to draw you together. And it's then that you begin to see yourself in an objective way in the other person. And so it's just a fact. It's just a fact that many of us would have discovered in our wives the very things that we had wrong in ourselves, except that we are always such good judges of them. I mean, we can always condemn it so clearly and plainly in them, but we are always so poor at condemning it in ourselves. I think it's just a beautiful plan that God has to get around our hypocrisy. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just a fact, loved ones. I think husbands and wives would probably testify to. Maybe just one more question. See? Yeah. Yes, yes. Good. I think, Anita, it might come into studies in future Sundays, but I could briefly comment. Anita says, what about a verse, several verses down from what we read in 1 Corinthians, where it says, let those who have wives be as though they had none. And how would you interpret it? And I think that many of us here would have come to the point in our own lives where we do put Jesus first in our hearts. And it has brought a balance and perspective into our attitude to our marriages, where before we were looking to our marriage for all the security, significance, and happiness that we needed, now we are able to get it from God. And so we are able to live free from the binding of purely human love. And loved ones, isn't human love, purely human love as opposed to spiritual love, is binding, isn't it? You know, where you love the person, but there's something of self in it, and I'll try to talk about the 3 loves next Sunday, where there's something of self in it, and so you love them partly because they're loving you, and so you're afraid not to love them in case they won't love you, and so it becomes a binding thing. So it seems, Anita, that as we come into the position that God wants us to be in regard to Jesus, we come free of that, and we're able at last to love the other person freely, not so that they love us back, but because we just love them. And then it is that we live as if we were not married in the worldly sense, that is not bound by the world's idea of marriage, but more faithful than ever before to our married partners. Yeah. I think we'd testify, those of us who have begun to deal with Jesus in our own lives, that the only result it brings in marriage is a more tender and a more kindly and a more thoughtful and unselfish love for our dear ones. Yeah. Well, loved ones, we'll try next day to continue talking about the purpose of marriage. And so if you have questions, will you note them down, or you can put them into the reception office at the end of the service.